The first shot wasn't a warning. It was a promise of violence echoing across the Arizona desert in 1875. The Wells Fargo stagecoach bucked like a wild horse, throwing 20-year-old Florence Kincaid against the hard wooden wall. Dust and chaos filled the small space. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum beat against the thunder of galloping hooves that had suddenly gone silent. From the driver's box, a scream. "Ladies, get down!" Florence didn't need to be told twice. She hit the floor, her emerald dress spreading around her like a puddle of dark water. Beside her, two other women were already huddled low. Mrs. Elena Whitfield, the wife of some big-shot banker, and Sophia Martinez, a young schoolteacher with eyes full of prayer. "Outlaws!" Mrs. Whitfield choked out, her voice a thin, terrified thread. Florence's mind wasn't on outlaws. It was on the letters in her bag, a job offer, a new life in Tucson as a bookkeeper for her late father's business partner. After her father's death, after the debts piled up so high they blotted out the sun, that offer wasn't just a job. It was salvation. But salvation felt a long way off. The coach shuddered to a stop. The driver's voice floated down, ragged with defeat. "I'm stopping! Don't shoot!" A terrible silence fell, thick and heavy. Florence knew the rumors about the Jackson gang. They didn't just take the strongbox, they took the women, and you just know that's when the real nightmare was about to begin. A gruff voice tore through the silence. "Everyone out! Hands where I can see 'em!" The coach door swung open. A man stood there, a dusty bandana hiding his face, but his eyes were as cold and dead as a winter sky. He held a revolver, and it was pointed right at them. "Ladies first." One by one, they stepped out into the blinding sun. Florence's boots hit the dirt, her legs threatening to give way. When her eyes adjusted, she saw 5 of them. 5 armed men, all masked, surrounding the coach like vultures. The driver and the shotgun guard stood with their hands in the air, their faces pale. The leader, a tall man with a red bandana and a nasty scar peeking over the top, sauntered over. "Well now," he drawled, his voice slick with menace, "look what we got here." He got right up in Florence's face. The smell of cheap whiskey and tobacco rolled off him in waves. "What's your name, pretty thing?" Before she could speak, the shotgun guard made a mistake, a fatal one. He lunged for his dropped weapon. A single crack echoed in the dead air. The guard dropped, a crumpled heap in the dust. Mrs. Whitfield let out a piercing shriek. Florence had never seen a man die before. It was uglier than she could have imagined. The leader didn't even flinch. "Anyone else feeling brave?" he asked the air. No one moved. "Now then," he said, turning his cold eyes back to the women. "You 3 are coming with us. We got a nice little place for you." Florence's mind was screaming. There was no escape. They were in the middle of nowhere, miles from any town, surrounded by nothing but rock and sand. As one of the bandits started tying the driver to a wheel, another one, a short man with a noticeable limp, came toward them with a rope. "Tie him up," the leader ordered. "But be gentle. Don't want to damage the goods." The man with the limp reached for Florence's wrists, but just as his grimy fingers brushed her skin, another sound cut through the desert heat, a faint rhythmic pounding, hoofbeats, coming fast. Every outlaw's head snapped toward the horizon. A single rider was silhouetted against the blazing sun, a dark shape growing larger by the second. "Who the hell is that?" one of the bandits growled. The leader raised a spyglass, squinted, and then let out a string of curses that would make a sailor blush. "It's him," he spat, a new kind of tension in his voice. "The Ranger." Florence felt a tiny spark of hope. "Just one man," another outlaw scoffed. "We can take him." The leader shook his head slowly. "That ain't no ordinary man," he whispered, and the name he spoke sent a shiver through the entire gang. "That's Nathaniel Knox." The name meant nothing to Florence, but the fear it inspired in these killers meant everything. This wasn't just a lawman. This was a ghost, a legend, and he was riding right for them. The leader, Jackson, panicked. "Get the women on the horses! Now!" But it was too late. The rider was already there, his powerful black stallion moving like a storm cloud across the desert floor. He was tall in the saddle, wearing a long duster that billowed out behind him. In one fluid motion, a motion so fast it barely registered, he raised his rifle and fired from the saddle. The outlaw holding Florence cried out, clutching a suddenly bloody shoulder. And then all hell broke loose. The bandits scattered, diving for cover as bullets tore through the air. The lone rider, this Nathaniel Knox, swung down from his horse, using the animal as a shield, firing with a speed and accuracy that was simply inhuman. One man down, then another. He moved with a deadly grace, each shot finding its mark. It wasn't a gunfight. It was an execution. "He's just one man!" Jackson screamed, his voice cracking. "Kill him!" But his men were falling too fast. In the middle of the chaos, a hand grabbed Florence's arm, yanking her hard. It was Jackson. He dragged her behind the stagecoach, pressing the cold steel of his revolver to her temple. He was using her as a shield. "Enough, Knox!" he bellowed. "Drop your gun or the girl gets it!" The shooting stopped. The dust began to settle. Florence could see Knox standing by his horse, his rifle lowered but still ready. His face was shadowed by his hat, but his eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to cut right through her. "Let her go, Jackson." Knox's voice was low, steady, and full of a quiet power that was more intimidating than any shout. "You and I both know how this ends." Jackson's grip tightened. "Not this time, Ranger. I'm walking away, and she's coming with me." But something inside Florence snapped. Fear gave way to pure, unadulterated rage. She was not a prize. She was not a shield. She drove her heel down hard on Jackson's boot. Then, with all her might, she rammed her elbow back into his ribs. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for just a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She twisted away, scrambling into the dirt. A single shot rang out. Jackson staggered back, his gun clattering to the ground as he clutched his arm. In an instant, Knox was there, pulling her behind him, his own pistol now leveled at the outlaw leader. "It's over, Jackson," Knox said, his voice flat. "On your knees." Jackson stared at Knox with pure, venomous hatred. For a second, it looked like he might try something foolish, but the fight was gone from him. Defeated, he sank to his knees in the dust. Within minutes, it was done. The surviving outlaws were disarmed, their hands bound tightly. Knox moved with an unnerving efficiency, checking every knot, collecting every weapon. He was a professional. Only when the scene was secure did he finally turn his attention to the women. Up close, he was younger than she'd thought, maybe 30. His skin was bronzed by the sun, and his eyes were the color of a gathering storm. A thin, white scar traced a line along his jaw. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Florence could only shake her head, her own voice lost somewhere in her throat. "No," she finally managed. "Thanks to you. You saved us, Mr. Knox." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Nathaniel Knox. Most folks just call me Knox." "Florence Kincaid," she replied, suddenly aware of the dust on her dress and the hair falling from its pins. He gave a slight tip of his hat. "Miss Kincaid." His eyes lingered on her for a moment, and Florence felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. Then he turned to the others. "The danger's past for now, but we need to get moving. There's a way station 10 miles west. We can make it by nightfall." As Knox went to help the driver, Florence watched him. This strange contradiction of a man. He dealt in death with the skill of a surgeon, yet his hands were gentle as he checked on Mrs. Whitfield. "Is he really a ranger?" she asked the driver as he climbed back onto the coach. The driver shook his head. "Not anymore. Used to be. Something happened a few years back. Now he rides alone. A bounty hunter, some say. Others call him a ghost. All I know is, when Knox shows up, justice ain't far behind. Florence looked back at the man who had appeared out of the desert like an avenging angel. He was tying the outlaws to their own horses, his movements economical and precise. There was something more to him than just skill, something deeper. Knox walked back over to her. "Miss Kincaid, I want you and the other ladies back inside the coach. I'll ride alongside. If anything happens, you do exactly what I tell you." No hesitation. It wasn't a request. It was a command, but it was laced with concern. Florence simply nodded. "Of course, Mr. Knox." He held her gaze for a beat too long, and that strange flutter returned to her chest. Then he was gone, helping the others, swinging onto his stallion. As the stagecoach rumbled back into motion, Florence watched him through the window. Nathaniel Knox rode tall, his eyes never stopping their scan of the horizon. She had a feeling her journey to Tucson had just become a lot more complicated. She had no idea that the man riding beside them wasn't just a rescuer. He was a man with a dark past, and he was heading into a trap that was bigger and more dangerous than any of them could possibly imagine. The way station was a squat stone building that appeared like a mirage as the sun bled across the horizon. To Florence, it looked like a palace. Knox dismounted first, his eyes sweeping the area, his hand never far from his gun. Only when he was satisfied did he wave the coach forward. An old man with a shotgun appeared in the doorway. "Easy, Morgan," Knox called out. "Got some passengers for you, and some trash that needs watching." The old man, Morgan, lowered his weapon, a look of recognition on his weathered face. "Knox, didn't figure I'd see you this far south. Heard you were hunting the Jackson gang." "Found 'em," Knox said simply, gesturing to the prisoners. Morgan let out a low whistle. "So I see. Well, get on in. Stew's hot." The inside was simple, but clean. A few tables, a stone fireplace. Morgan's wife, Ruth, a kind woman with gentle eyes, showed the ladies to a back room. They washed the grime from their faces, the clean water feeling like a luxury. When they emerged, the smell of venison stew filled the air. Knox was already at a table by the door, positioned so he could watch the entrance and the porch where the outlaws were tied. He stood as they entered, a small gesture of respect that seemed out of place on such a rugged man. Florence found herself sitting near him, the warmth from the fireplace doing little to calm the strange energy she felt in his presence. "Have you been tracking them long, Mr. Knox?" she asked, trying to break the silence. Something flickered in his stormy eyes. 3 months. They've hit every stage between Prescott and Tucson. What happens to them now? The marshal in Tucson will see they stand trial." His voice was flat, certain. "Jackson's got enough on him to hang 10 times over." Florence shivered. "I'm just grateful you were there." "Right place, right time," he said, deflecting the praise. "I doubt it was a coincidence," she pressed gently. "You don't seem like a man who leaves things to chance." Their eyes met, and for a split second, Florence felt like he was seeing right through her, past the scared young woman, and into the person she was trying to be. "You're observant, Miss Kincaid," he said, his voice low. "Necessity brings me to this territory, Mr. Knox," she found herself admitting. "My father passed away. He left behind considerable debt. His old business partner in Tucson offered me a position as a bookkeeper. I'm sorry for your loss," Knox said, and the simple words felt genuine. "This partner, who is he?" "A Mr. Harrington. He owns a mercantile." Knox's head snapped up, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Surprise? Concern? "Harrington's mercantile? Yes, you know it?" "Everyone in the territory knows Harrington's," he said slowly, his gaze distant. "It's the biggest store south of Phoenix, growing fast." A wave of relief washed over Florence. "That's wonderful to hear." "It's honest work," Knox agreed, but his eyes were hard. But Tucson is a rough town, growing too fast, attracting all kinds. He looked at her, his gaze intense. A woman alone needs to be careful. Was that a warning? Before she could ask, Morgan, the station keeper, interrupted. Marshall won't be here till day after tomorrow, he told Knox. You staying? Knox nodded. I'll see the ladies to Tucson myself. Jackson has friends. They might not be happy he's been caught. Florence felt a secret thrill at the thought of him traveling with them, and she hated herself for it. This was not a time for foolish feelings. This was a time for survival. As the evening wore on, Knox remained a silent, watchful presence. He'd step outside every so often, a dark silhouette against the moonlit desert, scanning the endless horizon. Later, in the small room she shared with the other women, Florence couldn't sleep. The day's terror kept replaying in her mind, but it was always followed by the image of Knox, appearing from the dust, a force of nature. She crept to the window and saw him out there, standing at the edge of the corral, motionless. He wasn't just on guard. He was listening to the desert, reading its secrets. He was a man completely alone, and something about his solitude called to a lonely place deep inside her. As if he felt her eyes on him, he turned his head, his gaze sweeping over the station. She ducked back from the window, her heart pounding. Had he seen her? She didn't think so. But she had seen something in his posture. He wasn't just watching for Jackson's men, he was expecting them. The next morning, Florence found Knox in the main room, cleaning his revolver with the practiced hands of a master craftsman. He looked up as she entered, and his intense gaze made her feel self-conscious. The driver mentioned you used to be a ranger, she said, pouring herself a coffee. A shudder came down over his face. I was, a long time ago. Why did you leave? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Sometimes, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper, the law gets in the way of justice. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. This man operated by his own code. So what are you now? She asked. A bounty hunter? Someone has to fill the gaps the law can't reach, he said, his eyes meeting hers. At great risk to yourself. He just shrugged. I'm good at staying alive. Throughout the day, a strange tension hung over the way station. Knox was a coiled spring, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Florence found her own gaze drawn to him again and again. She learned small things. He fought for the Union in the war, joining up when he was just 17. He came from Pennsylvania but had no family left. Each piece of information felt like a hard-won prize. Late in the afternoon it happened. Morgan shouted from the porch, "Riders coming, Knox! 3 of them, from the east!" Instantly, Knox was on his feet, his hand on his gun. "Get in the back room," he ordered Florence, his voice sharp. "Stay away from the windows." The terror from the day before came rushing back. Florence herded the other women into the back room, her heart pounding against her ribs. They could hear voices from the porch, Knox's deep, calm rumble, and the rougher tones of strangers. The conversation went on for what felt like an eternity. Florence pressed her ear to the wall, trying to make out the words. She heard one of the strangers laugh, a harsh, ugly sound. "We ain't here for Jackson," the man said. "We're here for what Jackson was after." There was a pause. Then Knox's voice, colder than ice. "You're mistaken." "Are we?" The stranger sneered. "Harrington pays well for special cargo, especially cargo that can keep his books quiet. The girl's father knew too much, and now, so does she." Florence's blood ran cold. Harrington, her father's friend, the man who had offered her salvation, it was a lie. All of it. The job wasn't a rescue. It was a lure. They hadn't been trying to kidnap her. They were trying to silence her. A sudden explosion of gunfire erupted from the porch. The women screamed. Florence threw herself to the floor as bullets splintered the wooden walls of the station. The fight was short and brutal. A series of shots, a man's scream, and then a heavy thud against their door. Then, silence. A silence more terrifying than the noise. The door creaked open. Nathaniel Knox stood there, his pistol smoking, his face grim. Two bodies lay on the porch behind him. A third was slumped against the wall. "It's over," he said, but his eyes weren't on the other women. They were on Florence. "You heard," he stated. It wasn't a question. Florence could only nod, the world tilting beneath her feet. "My father, Harrington. Your father sent a letter to the Rangers a month before he died," Knox said, his voice low and urgent. "He was being blackmailed by Harrington. He had ledgers, proof of a smuggling ring that reached all the way to San Francisco. Harrington runs everything. The Jackson gang, they were just hired muscle." "So the job offer was a trap," Knox finished. "He needed to get you to Tucson to find out what you knew and get his hands on those ledgers." He holstered his pistol. "The attack on the Stagecoach wasn't random. They were there specifically for you." It was too much. Her father, a man she thought she knew, caught up in something so dark. Her own life, a lie built by a man she was supposed to trust. "Why are you telling me this? You're not a Ranger anymore." "No," he said, his stormy eyes locking onto hers. "I'm not. The Rangers didn't believe your father's letter. They thought he was a crank. But I did. I quit the Rangers to investigate on my own. I've been tracking Harrington's operation for 6 months." He took a step closer. "I wasn't tracking the Jackson gang, Florence. I was tracking you." He hadn't shown up by chance. He had been following the Stagecoach from the start, a guardian angel she never knew she had, waiting for the inevitable attack. But that wasn't the biggest shock. "The marshal in Tucson is on Harrington's payroll," Knox continued, his voice dropping even lower. "The law in this territory is bought and paid for. We can't go to him. We can't trust anyone." He looked from Florence to the other women, then back to the bodies on his porch. "We have to run." The decision was made in the pale light of dawn. They couldn't stay. They couldn't go to Tucson. Knox himself urged them to leave immediately. Before they left, he spotted more dust on the horizon. "Too many to be the marshal," he said grimly, helping Florence into the coach. "It's Harrington's men. They know their first team failed." "Then come with us," Florence pleaded, her voice tight with fear. Knox shook his head. "I have to slow them down, buy you time." He looked at the driver. "Get them to the old mission at San Xavier. Wait for me there. Don't stop for anything." He turned back to Florence, his expression intense. "Morgan and Ruth will be fine. They'll say we overpowered them and fled west. It's you they want." As the coach pulled away, Florence watched him stand alone in the station yard, a solitary figure against the vastness of the desert, preparing to face an army. He wasn't just a lawman or a vigilante. He was her protector, and he was probably riding to his death. The journey was a blur of fear. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Mrs. Whitfield was a wreck, sobbing quietly in the corner. But Sophia, the school teacher, showed a surprising strength, her quiet calm helping to keep Florence from falling apart. "You're thinking about him," Sophia said softly after hours of tense silence. Florence didn't deny it. "He's facing them alone." "He is a very capable man," Sophia replied, "and he is doing it for you." "I barely know him." "Sometimes," Mrs. Whitfield added, her voice shaky but clear, "you can know a man's heart in a day better than you can know another's in a lifetime." Her words hit Florence with the force of a physical blow. Was it possible to feel so deeply for someone in such a short, violent span of time? Before she could process the thought, the driver yelled, "Wilson's Creek! We'll water the horses, quick!" The coach slowed, pulling into a grove of cottonwood trees. But as they approached the creek bed, a sense of dread washed over Florence. It was too quiet, too still. "Wait!" the new shotgun guard called from up top. "Horses! In the trees. The driver yanked the team to a halt. Just then, men emerged from the shadows, 5 of them, all armed, blocking their path. But these weren't Jackson's men. They were better dressed, their guns cleaner. They looked more like hired killers than common outlaws. "That's far enough," their leader said, his voice cold and professional. "Mr. Harrington sends his regards. He'd like the young lady to come with us now, quietly." Florence's heart sank. They'd been outmaneuvered. Harrington had men everywhere. The guard raised his shotgun, but it was hopeless. 5 against 2. Just as she was about to give up, to sacrifice herself to save the others, a voice echoed from the rocks above them. A familiar voice. "I wouldn't advise that." Nathaniel Knox stepped into view, his rifle already at his shoulder. The killers spun around, their faces a mixture of shock and fury. "Knox!" their leader snarled. "How?" "I'm faster than you think," Knox said, his voice calm, but his eyes were blazing. "Now drop your weapons." The leader laughed, a hollow, ugly sound. "It's 5-1, Knox. You took down Jackson's rabble. We're a different class of problem." "You are," Knox agreed. "But you all died just the same." He glanced down at Florence in the coach, a flicker of something protective in his eyes. "Last chance. Walk away." One of the killers decided to test him. He went for his gun. He never cleared the holster. Knox's rifle cracked once. The man flew backward off his horse, a dark stain spreading on his chest. Before the others could even react, Knox fired again, and again. It was a symphony of destruction. He moved from target to target with impossible speed, each shot precise, each one fatal. In less than 5 seconds, it was over. 5 men lay dead or dying in the dust. Knox scrambled down from the rocks, his rifle still ready. Florence threw open the coach door and ran to him, the relief so overwhelming it made her dizzy. How did you beat them here?" He looked at her, and now she could see the signs of his own fight. A fresh gash on his cheek, his duster torn and bloody. "There were more than I thought back at the station," he said grimly. "I dealt with them. Then I cut across the high trail. I knew they'd try to head you off here." She reached out, her fingers gently touching the cut on his cheek. "You're hurt." He caught her hand, his grip surprisingly gentle. "It's nothing." He looked around at the carnage, then back at her. "Harrington won't stop. He'll send more. The mission is no longer safe. We have to disappear." "Where can we go?" Knox's gaze became distant. "There's a place. An old mining town deep in the mountains. Abandoned. No one's been there in years. It's our only chance." He was still holding her hand. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he didn't care. "But getting there. It's a hard ride. Dangerous country." "We have to try," Florence said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know it possessed. "The other ladies," Knox began. "We will not leave them," Sophia said, stepping out of the coach, her face pale but determined. Mrs. Whitfield followed, her expression terrified but resolute. Knox looked at the 3 of them, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. Then he nodded. "All right, we ride together." He finally let go of Florence's hand, but the warmth of his touch lingered. He turned to the driver. "You and the guard take the coach. Drive it hard south. Make them think they're still on your trail. It might buy us some time." "And you?" the driver asked. Knox was already pulling the saddles from the dead men's horses. "We're going where they'll never find us." He looked at Florence. "Can you ride?" "My father taught me," she said. "Good," he replied, throwing a saddle on a sturdy-looking mare. "Because we're about to ride like the devil himself is on our heels." He wasn't just running from Harrington's men anymore. He was running from a corrupt system he used to be a part of. And Florence was beginning to realize that the ledgers her father had hidden weren't just about smuggling. They were about something much, much bigger, something that could get them all killed. They rode for 2 days straight, pushing themselves and the horses to the breaking point. Knox led them through canyons and over mesas, following trails that barely existed. He was a master of the land, reading the signs, avoiding the open spaces. He was part hunter, part ghost. At night, they made cold camps, no fires allowed, eating dried jerky and sleeping in shifts. During one of his watches, Florence found herself unable to sleep. She went and sat beside him, pulling her blanket tight against the mountain chill. The stars were a brilliant canopy above them. "Why did you really quit the Rangers?" she asked, her voice soft in the darkness. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes on the horizon. "A few years ago," he began, his voice low, "we were tracking a gang, not unlike Jackson's. We cornered them in a box canyon, the captain in charge. He was ambitious. He didn't want prisoners. He wanted a reputation." Knox's jaw tightened. "They surrendered, threw down their guns, and he ordered us to open fire anyway." Florence gasped. "A massacre!" "I refused the order," Knox said, his voice flat. "I stood between our men and the prisoners. The captain called me a traitor, tried to have me arrested. I defended myself. I left him alive, but I had to disappear. They put a warrant out on me. Obstruction of justice. Assaulting a superior officer. To them, I'm a wanted man." The hero who had saved her was a fugitive. It explained everything. His solitary life, his distrust of the law. He wasn't just filling the gaps. He was living in them. "So, Harrington?" "He knows," Knox confirmed. "He has contacts everywhere. He probably thinks he can use that warrant to control me or get rid of me if he has to." He turned to her, his face a mask of shadows in the starlight. "You're tied to me now, Florence. Being with me puts you in even more danger." "I don't care," she whispered, and she was surprised to find she meant it. "You saved my life. More than once." "Harrington doesn't just smuggle goods," Knox continued, changing the subject. "He smuggles people. He sells fraudulent mining claims. He buys judges and marshals. Your father's ledgers. They don't just incriminate Harrington. They incriminate half the powerful men in the Arizona Territory. That's why they're so desperate to get them." "Do you know where they are?" she asked. He shook his head. "Your father's letter just said he'd hidden them somewhere no one would ever think to look." The next day, they reached the abandoned mining town. It was a collection of dilapidated shacks clinging to the side of a mountain, a ghost town in the truest sense. It was eerie, but it was safe. For now. They settled into the old assayer's office, the most solid building still standing. For a week, they lived in a strange limbo. Knox scouted the area, ensuring they weren't followed. The women cleaned the small cabin, making it as livable as possible. A strange sort of domesticity settled over them, a stark contrast to the violence that had brought them there. Florence found herself watching Knox constantly. She saw the way he cared for the horses, the quiet patience he showed Mrs. Whitfield when she broke down, the respect he gave Sophia. Beneath the hard, lethal exterior was a good and decent man, wounded by the world he had tried to serve. One evening, as they shared a meal of rabbit Knox had caught, he suddenly looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Your father's letter. He said he left you a key to your inheritance. What did he mean?" Florence frowned. "I thought he meant the job offer, the key to a new life." "No," Knox said slowly. "He was a careful man. He would have meant something literal." He leaned forward. "Think, Florence. Did he give you anything before you left? Any keepsake? Anything at all?" Her mind raced. Her father had been sick for weeks before he died. They hadn't talked much. But then she remembered. The day before she was supposed to leave Missouri, he had called her to his bedside. He was weak, his voice a rasp. He had pressed her old leather-bound journal into her hands, the one she'd kept since she was a girl. "Never stop writing your own story, Florence," he had whispered, "and never forget the beginning." She had clutched that journal to her chest during the Stagecoach attack. It was in her saddlebags right now. She told Knox what her father had said. His eyes lit up. The beginning. Your first entry. Florence retrieved the journal, her hands trembling. She opened it to the very first page, dated on her 10th birthday. The handwriting was childish, the ink faded. It was just a simple entry about the pony he had given her. But as she ran her fingers over the page, she felt it. A slight thickness, a subtle difference in the paper. Knox pulled out his knife. Carefully, he slit the edge of the page. The front and back papers had been glued together, and sandwiched between them was another piece of paper, thin as onion skin, covered in a tight, coded script. It wasn't a letter. It was a series of numbers and symbols. "It's the ledger," Knox breathed, his voice filled with awe. He didn't hide the books. He transcribed the most important parts into a code only you could find. But the hope was short-lived. The code was unbreakable, a meaningless jumble of figures. "He must have left a cipher," Knox muttered, pacing the small cabin. "Another key to unlock this one." "He said never forget the beginning," Florence repeated, her mind racing. "The beginning of my story." She looked down at the journal. "This journal. He gave it to me on my birthday, along with a book of poems. I loved it. I must have read it 1,000 times. Where is that book now?" Knox asked urgently. "It's—" Florence's heart sank. "It's in my trunk, on the stagecoach." The very thing they needed to bring down Harrington was miles away, in the hands of the enemy. For a moment, despair settled over the room. It was over. They had the coded message, but without the key, it was useless. They were trapped. Then Knox stopped pacing. He looked at Florence, a new, dangerous light in his eyes. "They'll have taken the coach to Tucson, to Harrington's warehouse." "You can't be thinking of going there," Mrs. Whitfield gasped. "It's suicide." "We don't have a choice," Knox said, his voice grim. "We can't hide here forever. Sooner or later, they'll find us. Our only way out is to fight, to expose Harrington before he can bury us." He looked directly at Florence. "But I can't do it alone." "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady. "The book of poems," he said. "What was it called?" "Leaves of Grass," Florence replied instantly. "By Walt Whitman." A slow smile spread across Knox's face. "I'll need you to remember every line you can." He was going to walk into the lion's den, into the heart of Harrington's operation, and their only weapons were a coded message and a book of poetry. It was insane. It was impossible. And it was their only hope. The plan was audacious. Knox would go into Tucson alone, under the cover of darkness. He would infiltrate Harrington's warehouse and retrieve the book from Florence's trunk. Meanwhile, Florence, Sophia, and Mrs. Whitfield would ride to a nearby town, Prescott, a place where Harrington's influence wasn't as strong. There they would try to find a territorial judge who wasn't on the payroll. "It's too dangerous," Florence argued as Knox prepared to leave. "Let me come with you." "No," he said firmly. "Your job is the most important. If something happens to me, you are the only one who can get that coded message to the right people. You have to get to Prescott. You have to find Judge Miller. He's an old army man. He can't be bought." He grabbed her shoulders, his gaze intense. "Promise me, Florence. Promise me you'll get to Prescott." She saw the desperation in his eyes, the fear he was trying so hard to hide. She nodded, unable to speak. He pressed a small, single-shot Derringer into her hand. "Just in case." He then mounted his horse, a dark shadow against the moon. "San Xavier mission, 3 days. If I'm not there, don't wait for me. Go to Miller." And then he was gone, melting into the night. The ride to Prescott was grueling. The 3 women pushed themselves, paranoia their constant companion. Every rider they saw was a potential threat. Every distant town was a potential trap. But they made it. Prescott was a bustling mining town, and for the first time in weeks, They felt a sliver of safety. Finding Judge Miller was easier than they expected. He was a stern, white-haired man with eyes that seemed to see right through you. They secured a meeting, and Florence laid out the entire story, her voice shaking at first, then growing stronger with conviction. She told him about her father, about Harrington, about the massacre at the way station, and about the man named Nathaniel Knox. When she mentioned Knox's name, the judge's expression hardened. Knox is a wanted man, a deserter, and a fugitive. He's a good man, Florence insisted. He was set up. The captain he supposedly assaulted, was he ever questioned about what happened in that canyon? Judge Miller stared at her, a long, calculating look. The captain was promoted shortly after the incident. He's now a major. He leaned back in his chair. You're asking me to believe a wild conspiracy theory based on the word of a known fugitive and a coded message you can't even read. I'm asking you to believe my father, Florence said, her voice ringing with sincerity, and to give an honest man a chance to prove his innocence. The judge was silent for a long time. Where is Knox now? He went to Tucson, Florence admitted, her heart sinking, to get the key to the code from my trunk. Miller's eyes widened in disbelief. He went back to Tucson? Alone? The boy is either the bravest man I've ever heard of, or the biggest fool. He stood up, pacing his office. If what you're saying is true, this rot goes deeper than anyone imagined. He stopped and looked at her. I'll send a telegram to a trusted federal marshal in Phoenix, but he's a day's ride away. It may be too late for your friend. Meanwhile, in Tucson, Knox slipped through the darkened streets like a phantom. He found Harrington's warehouse, a massive structure near the rail yards. Getting in was the easy part. A high window, a quiet drop to the floor. The hard part was finding one trunk in a sea of goods. He moved silently through the cavernous space, a ghost among crates and barrels. He finally found it in a corner, a section for seized passenger luggage, Florence's trunk. He picked the lock with practiced ease and began to search. And there it was, a slim volume of poetry. Leaves of Grass. He tucked it inside his coat. He had what he came for. Now he just had to get out. But as he turned to leave, the warehouse doors groaned open. Light flooded the space. Harrington stood there, flanked by a dozen armed men, and beside him, his face a mask of smug triumph, was the outlaw leader, Jackson. His arm was in a sling, but he was very much alive. "Looking for this, Knox?" Harrington asked, his voice smooth as silk. He was holding up a familiar leather-bound journal, Florence's journal. "My men found it on the stagecoach. A very sentimental young woman leaving her diary behind." Knox's blood ran cold. They had the coded message. "It took my codebreaker a while," Harrington continued. "But he's a clever man. He realized the code was likely tied to something personal, something from her childhood. He held up the book of poems. And when we found this in her trunk, it all clicked into place. Page number, line number, word number. Simple, really, once you have the key." Jackson smiled, a cruel, ugly thing. "Looks like your luck's run out, Ranger." "I'm not a ranger," Knox said, his hand slowly moving toward his pistol. "Oh, I know," Harrington said with a chuckle. "I also know about the warrant, about the massacre. It's amazing what a man can find out when he has enough money." He gestured to his men. "Kill him, but make it slow. I want him to know he failed." Knox knew he was outgunned, trapped. There was no escape. But he wasn't going down without a fight. He drew his pistol, diving behind a stack of crates as the warehouse exploded in a hail of gunfire. The fight was desperate, a one-man stand against impossible odds. Knox was good, better than any of them, but he was just one man. He took down 3, then 4, but they were closing in, their bullets chewing up his cover. A searing pain shot through his shoulder. He'd been hit. He gritted his teeth, firing back, his vision starting to blur. Just as Jackson and two other men were about to rush his position, a new sound cut through the chaos, a high, piercing whistle. And then the warehouse's massive side doors burst open. A flood of men poured in, armed with rifles and shotguns, led by a man with a silver star on his chest, a federal marshal. "Harrington!" the marshal bellowed. "You and your men are under arrest by order of the United States government." Harrington stared in disbelief, his face crumbling. Jackson, seeing his chance, made a run for the back exit. But he didn't get far. A single shot rang out from the doorway, and the outlaw dropped in his tracks. Standing there, smoke curling from the barrel of a small derringer, was Florence King Cade. Behind her stood Judge Miller and a posse of deputies from Prescott. She had never fired a gun in her life, but when she saw Jackson running, she didn't hesitate. She just aimed and pulled the trigger. The fight was over. Harrington's men threw down their guns. Harrington himself stood frozen, his empire collapsing around him. Florence ran into the warehouse, her eyes searching frantically. She found Knox slumped behind the crates, pale and bleeding but alive. "Florence," he breathed, a look of pure astonishment on his face. "I told you to go to Prescott." "I did," she said, tears streaming down her face as she tore a strip from her dress to press against his wound. "And then we came back for you. I wasn't going to let you face them alone." Later, after Knox's wound had been tended to, they learned the whole story. Judge Miller, convinced by Florence's passion, hadn't just sent a telegram. He had ridden with his own men to Phoenix to meet the federal marshal in person, showing him the decoded ledgers that Florence had painstakingly transcribed based on her memory of the poems. The evidence was overwhelming. The marshal had gathered his own troops, and they had ridden hard for Tucson, arriving in the nick of time. Harrington, Jackson, and their entire network were brought down. The corrupt local marshal was arrested. The investigation into the Canyon Massacre was reopened, and with testimony from Knox, the ambitious captain was finally brought to justice. Knox's name was cleared. He was offered his position back with the Rangers, with a promotion. He turned it down. A few weeks later, he found Florence at the Tucson Wells Fargo office. She was booking a ticket back to Missouri. Her father's name had been cleared, the farm was safe. She was going home. "So you're leaving," Knox said, standing behind her. "My work here is done," she said, not turning around. "Is it?" he asked, his voice soft. He stepped beside her and took her hand. "My life has been about running. From the war, from the Rangers, from myself. But when I was in that warehouse, and I saw you standing in that doorway, I realized I was done running. I finally found something I want to run to." Florence finally turned to look at him. His arm was still in a sling, but his eyes were clear and full of a feeling she was just beginning to understand. "The marshal in Phoenix has offered me a job," he said. "A U.S. deputy marshal. A chance to build something new, to do the law some good, for real this time." He squeezed her hand. "But I don't want to do it alone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring. "I know it's been a chaotic courtship," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Florence King Cade, will you stay and build a new life with me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought you'd never ask, Nathaniel," she whispered. She canceled her ticket. Their life wasn't easy. The West was still a hard and dangerous place, but they faced it together. Knox became a legendary lawman, known for his fairness as much as his skill with a gun. Florence, with her sharp mind for numbers, helped establish Tucson's first bank, ensuring men like Harrington could never again hold the town hostage. They built a home, a life, a family, all of it born from the fire and chaos of a single stagecoach robbery. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying moments of our lives are just the beginning of our real story, and a testament to the fact that sometimes the most dangerous man in the territory is the only one you can trust. If you enjoyed this story of justice in the Old West, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next strange, dark, and mysterious tale.